All right. We got another episode of Live on Mars. I'm Alex, CEO and co-founder of MarsBased, and in this occasion, I will bring you Jessica Ford, the director of Startup Digest, which is a community-driven newsletter that is sent worldwide and globally mostly for entrepreneurs events, startup events, and tech events. Every ecosystem has got an issue of Startup Digest. We have been curating it in Barcelona since 2016 after couple years, maybe a year of being in dormant state. There was nobody curating it. Prior to us, it has been, I think the people at Itnic and the people at Barcino had curated it, but for a year that I was sending events, I was sending our Startup Brand events, we noticed that it was not being sent out, so we claimed it, and we have been curating it ever since. So it's been more than 5 years that we have been curating this newsletter, and we will be discussing with Jessica about many different subjects regarding newsletters and community building. Because, for instance, we know that every ecosystem has got an issue of Startup Digest, but they can be very different in nature. Some of them are focused on content, some of them are focused on events, some others curate other interesting topics and content for the ecosystem leaders and for all the participants in the startups ecosystems. And so we've got an internal ranking that helps us to see, opening rates, click-through rates, and whatnot. That's very important when you create newsletters. As a matter of fact, in MarsBased, we curate 3 newsletters. Our own corporate one, the MarsBased newsletter, to keep our friends and family and the immediate circles updated as to what we do. Then the Startup Digest one, and then Startup Brand Barcelona, which has got over 7,000 subscribers right now. We'll be discussing about how to start implementing this kind of newsletters, how to do curation, how to do the moderation, how to implement technology as you go, but not necessarily from the very beginning. So they start with a very manual process. Then as they scaled up, they built sort of a bespoke MVP, a platform that it helped them to scale up to a certain amount of countries and cities. But definitely when it became too painful, then finally they moved to Revue or Revue. I don't even know how that's pronounced. The newsletter platform that was acquired by Twitter a couple of years back. This is very interesting. It's kind of one of the conversations that we've been having recently, the MarsBased and friends kind of conversations. We want to introduce you to people that we work for, that we work with, or that we have worked with or for in the past, because they're all great people. They're supporting or spearheading great projects, like in this case, Startup Digest, and we want to support them, and we want to spread the word and the love. A bit of a company update then, speaking about community building. So you know that at MarsBased, we also curate a community for entrepreneurs that's called Startups Barcelona. It's an online Slack community that's been around since 2015. We decided to launch an online platform for entrepreneurs and tech people of Barcelona to connect between events, because some people would meet at our Startup Brand events or the Martian Tech Talks or other events in Barcelona, but then, they would have to wait until the next edition of the event to continue the conversation. So we decided to create this platform, a free, open for everybody platform that was available for people in Barcelona to connect among each other, and then just, kind of like in the spirit of our values, give and get help from everybody in the community. Over the course of the years, we've been doing this for 6 years now. It's grown. We have got more than 2,000 people registered. Only a bunch of them are active, as in like every other platform or Slack community out there. So about like 10% of them are active. Some of them are super active, and definitely it's great if you want to join and get some like very specific requests about like, hey, can you recommend a freelancer for design? Can I get a second opinion on our new copy? How would you implement A/B strategies and whatnot? But it's grown so much that we receive a lot of spam from recruiters, from other dev agencies, from other countries and whatnot. So we decided, unfortunately, for those, external to the community and external to Barcelona, to put a paywall. So if you're listening to this and you're probably part of the community, you know that you can still invite people for free. So within Slack, there's this /invite option and comments. So if you invite people there, all your friends, they can still They can still join for free, but we put up a paywall for those that don't know anybody in the community, and most likely they are going to spam. I know we'll be losing a few good people, but the pros far outweigh the cons, and in this case, we think it's a great move for the community. And some people are start paying already. We didn't integrate actually. That also will help us to put a new blog post, technical blog post, because we built an integration because Slack doesn't have auto invite. So a few years back, we devised this integration with Typeform and Slack to send out the auto invites once people register. And now we had to integrate it with Stripe via webhooks in order to send out the invoices to everybody who's made the payment. So big shout out and kudos to Nico from Typeform, because his blog post about how to integrate Stripe and Typeform via webhooks has been super useful for us to automatize the process of sending the invoice to those who have paid. So with no further ado, let's go right into the episode, and I hope that you enjoyed as much as I did. Let's jump right into it. Good morning, Jessica. Welcome to the show. Welcome to Live on Mars. How are you doing?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I've been wanting to have you for like a long time. Well, I mean, for the 2 years that we've been running this podcast, we've recorded about 100 episodes right now. And we've been running Startup Digest in Barcelona. There's perhaps a percentage of our audience that doesn't know that MarsBased, or me personally, we have been running the Startup Digest newsletter in Barcelona locally for 5-6 years now. I know time is kind of like blurry nowadays with the pandemic going on. And I wanted to give a little bit of the spotlight to this amazing project, because you've been amazing creating this super supportive tool worldwide, and maybe you want to introduce it a little bit better for our audience. I'm pretty sure that everybody knows Startup Digest, at least in Barcelona, but we've got people outside of Barcelona and other cities where Startup Digest might not be present.
Yeah, so Startup Digest is an email newsletter for anyone interested in entrepreneurship. So it could be as simple as someone just wanting to learn a little bit more about how they could start a company in their area or build their skills. Or it could be someone who's a seasoned founder, had multiple exits, things like that. There's value for everyone in Startup Digest. So that's the thing that I think is the most helpful for people, is like you can sign up, you can learn more about tech and startup events in your area. You can sign up for one of our reading lists and get to know, different topics or industries, and get resources for you to read for the week. So there's different things that we offer that can be really helpful for anyone just wanting to learn more.
When I started, I remember that was something that I would submit our event, because we started doing Startup Grind in Barcelona in 2014, early 2014. And then for a couple of years I was submitting, or for the first year I was submitting the events. And I remember always receiving like, oh, if you are in Startup Digest, that's a big deal. It was a big deal back in the day, because there were two newsletters in Barcelona, Startup Digest, and then another one called Barcino, which is all things startup, right? So if you were featured there, it's like, oh, wow. Then all people started coming to our events, because it had like 2,000 subscribers right now. Back then. And so it was a big deal. And especially in starting ecosystems and up and coming ecosystems, I think it's very good to have that. Probably some other ecosystems that have been more solid, they have their own local sort of Startup Digest, because some ecosystems I've seen, especially in San Francisco, there's a dedicated newsletter for events. It's not Startup Digest. There's also Startup Digest, of course, but there are others, right? There might be like some competitors, if you will. But at least in Barcelona, it was the only one, only dedicated to events. Now there are more things, as you said. There are other resources, and especially with the the adoption of Techstars, I think that kind of like it got empowered a little bit more. So how did that transition happen, and how did it help to start as a niche thing only for events in the beginning?
So we started back in 2009. So we've been around for quite a while. Yeah, and it started with just events. And so it started by someone that I went to school with. So Chris McCann, and then he brought on a co-founder, Brendan McManus. So they got together and really, they were living in Silicon Valley. There's a lot of events happening. They wanted to kind of find a way to cut out the noise and really give people like the best events going on, not just this comprehensive list where you could kind of search everywhere, but really show you the events of value. So that's kind of where it started. And then I came on to kind of help organize the editorial side when we started adding curators, adding cities, just to get that part organized. But it really just started to transition to, well, there's like more information out there that people want curated. So then we kind of started to expand to this reading list idea and kind of delving into different topics and different industries to try to, again, kind of bring the most valuable content to people and just deliver it directly to your inbox.
And you've been spearheading this project for so many years now. For me, it's always a reference when we receive we receive as curators of the Startup Digest issue in every city, we receive a weekly, monthly metrics of how you're going, like growth rate, click-through rate, and whatnot. And I think it's really important because most of these things like are extremely relevant. They let you know, first off, and locally, whether you're performing well or not, because you can contrast it with other newsletters. We run the MarsBased newsletter, we run the Startup Grind newsletter. But then with other chapters, I think it's really cool because that's an approach that we don't have a Startup Grind. We never compare between chapters because it's kind of like, no, everybody's cool. We're born in the 80s. We're kind of like, everybody's special, right? There's no one's better than the rest. But I find it very different that in Startup Digest, I think it helps. I think it helps to see how other chapters are faring so that you can see like, oh, it's motivational to know that there's one chapter that's outperforming everybody else that's been running this since 2009, right? I think you mentioned in the pre-chat, like, what's the best chapter running or the best issue running Startup Digest and why?
Oh man, I do have a few favorites. It really just kind of depends on the curators who are putting the most time into it. I think that's where you're getting like the most value is in that introduction section where the curators are expanding beyond just, a short welcome and really delving into like, here's what's really going on in my community and getting that personalized information out to their audience. I think that that's kind of what makes different digests stand out. It's just how much, personalized, customized information for your area that they're willing to share. I think that that's kind of what can make you stand out.
I think that's something that we definitely have to improve in Barcelona. I think we do a great job at curating and especially at being resilient and consistent. But I think that the introduction, you're really spot on there. I think that you can create a massive difference because that's what people see above the fold when they open the newsletter. And most email tools nowadays, they would just open emails automatically, then you delete, archive, whatever, and then you go straight into the next email. So open rates are not that relevant anymore, but it's like click-through rates, especially in the first, above the fold segment of the email. But in terms of longevity or consistency, like have you got internal metrics of chapters that have never skipped or issues that have never skipped a single week, without sending the newsletter, things like that? What's the most impressive thing that you've seen?
We have one curator who's been around longer than I have. So that would be Sarah Worthy in Houston, Texas. So she's been around curating longer than I've been at Digest, and I've been there since 2010. So quite a long time that she's been curating. So that's one of our longest running, in addition to like the Silicon Valley, San Francisco Digest, some of our reading lists that have been around for years. So we try to find curators who can be with us for a long period of time. And so, there are a handful that are still left from the early days.
Yeah, because one of the things that I think there are two sides to this thing. One is when you go to live, I don't know, in the States, there's perhaps more city mobility, right? People tend to move around between different states. So you kind of like, you're in Michigan, then you move to Silicon Valley or you move to whatever, Salt Lake City, and then you sign up to the issues of those particular cities. But very rarely you will unsubscribe from the previous ones because it's kind of like, it's a thing of your past. And, I used to live in Berlin. I signed up in Startup Grind for Startup Digest Berlin, and I still keep it. I've never lived in Berlin in 10 years. Or, San Francisco, I go there like 1-2 months a year, but I want to receive it every week or every month. It's kind of like, I want to know what's going on. I want to contrast with the ecosystems and whatnot. And one of the interesting things I wanted to talk to you about, and I want to get your opinion on, is that I think that a lot of people, they tend to fight their own wars. I see it every day. I've been active in the Barcelona startup ecosystem for about 10 years now. And we see that everybody wants to start their own newsletter, their own whatever, their own podcast. Well, yeah, granted, we are on the MarsBased podcast. But very rarely people rely or lean on an existing projects that they have branding figured out, platforms figured out, business model figured out, marketing figured out, everything else is pretty much figured out. They just need the execution, and they're waiting for you to pick them. I'm talking about Startup Digest, Startup Grind, FuckUp Nights, TEDx, all of these sort of like prepackaged brands that they provide an immense value to every ecosystem out there. Yet a lot of people, they still seem to prefer that their idea is going to be better than these ones. Like, I don't know, what's your opinion on this? Like, what's your take?
I've over the years, I've seen a lot of people come to me when they have filled out their application for Startup Digest, and they said, I've already tried to do this on my own. It was too much work, too difficult, whatever issues they were running into. And they just find that it's so much easier, to already have a template set up, and you've built a brand, and you can just plug in and get your community set up. And the thing I like about Startup Digest is that I feel like it helps bring the community together rather than trying to be something else where we're competing with other organizations in your area. It's like, well, we're really taking all of the information. It doesn't matter if you're competing with each other, these different organizations. We're going to take the best content and events and resources that you have and share that with the community. So I think it just can really bring people together instead of being all these siloed organizations, in these different communities. It's like a way to work together.
And what's more, sometimes you will find that these brands have already done the heavy lifting in your community and they've been abandoned. Like, that was the case of Startup Digest in Barcelona. Like, for the first year that I signed up for it and whatever, I was submitting the events and it was being sent. And then for almost the second year that I was doing Startup Prime, I was sending the events and I never bothered to check anymore whether it was being sent. And I was like, I knew that there was something of, if we wanted to start calculating the metrics of where do we get our people from. And I said, I'm going to set one from Startup Digest. And lo and behold, like, we saw that it hadn't been sent for 11 months. So I reached out to you and I said, hey, like, no one's running this. Like, can we apply? Is there something I can do to help? Like, and I'm like, oh, you want to run it yourself? I said, like, yeah, sure. Why not? But it hadn't been sent for 9 months. So, and that happens as well in Startup Prime. And I'm going to be like comparing both worlds because I'm very, I've been doing this for so many years now, both of them. So, and so we got Startup Digest with already, 2,000 subscribers and a community. And I remember sending out the first one after this year, and really top-notch people like VCs, investors, serial entrepreneurs, like people who have done like a massive exits. They're like, thanks for reactivating this project. And for me, it was like, dude, I just hit send and that was it, and so people can profit from something that's already there. And it's dormant. It's like in a zombie state, right? So that also brings another like a more mature tool to your tool set as well.
Yes, definitely. I mean, and we have lists, like hundreds of lists all over the world, and we need the volunteers to kind of step up and be those curators, be the leader for your community. And that's the hard part, is like keeping up with when you are working with entrepreneurs and people start new businesses, get too busy, like you have to keep up with the turnover, to be able to keep these curators around the world, like still, putting together the newsletters. Because we found that if you can keep it consistent with sending, like you'll see higher engagement rates rather than when you have this drop and then have to get the momentum going again.
Yeah, one of the things I see in these kind of projects where there is this compounding effect, right? It's not the same as like, oh, I'm going to prepare all these emails, or I'm going to record 10 episodes of the podcast this week and release them, like, drop them once per month, something like that. It's not the same as recording every week and releasing every week. Because the content's fresher, you're more motivated, you don't have that motivation drop kind of like when you want to reconnect after a month or 2 or 3 months. So I think it's the same with Startup Digest and all of these newsletters, right? You can skip a week, but if you break the habit, people are going to notice, and it's easier to be, it's easier to be 100% consistent, to be consistent 100% of the times than 99% of the times. Because if you do one exception, you're more likely to make another one. Right? Do you see any correlation between like people sending out every month and longevity of people staying in Startup Digest? Sorry, every week.
Well, so I think that what we try to do is offer flexibility to our curators, so you can choose if you want to publish weekly, bi-weekly, monthly. But what I find with the monthly newsletters is it's just too long in between issues. There's too much that can happen, that can change. So I think that as long as you're doing it weekly or bi-weekly, we see much higher engagement. It's just more on your own radar too, to remember to put together the content, to keep it going. So I do think it's been a lot better for those weekly and bi-weekly newsletters compared to trying to just do monthly.
Yeah, because sometimes even if it's like, sorry people, there are no events this week, you might want to send that email. You might want to send that email like, hey, we're live. It keeps the flow going. It keeps the momentum. And I think that even in those ones, we see a lot of engagement in that email. It's like, oh, thanks for letting us know, happy Christmas and whatever, right? So I think that you might want to do that. But in terms of frequency, right? The people that you probably see, that people who don't skip, like whatever their frequency is, if it's bi-weekly or weekly or monthly, the ones that have been consistent over the years, they're probably the ones that are less likely to drop out, right?
Yes, exactly.
How about in terms of, longevity is also important, but also there's another nuance here. Some events, or at least nowadays, especially nowadays, events tend to get organized like in the 15 days prior to the event date, right? So if you're running a monthly newsletter, you're most likely going to miss out on so many things. Let's talk a little bit more about the newsletter thing. So what kind of would be your advice for people starting out a newsletter, or maybe Startup Digest in particular, with no prior experience running a newsletter?
I think really kind of letting your personality shine through, getting that information out to the reader. There's so many newsletters out there right now that you really have to make yours special and figure out what can kind of set you apart, whether that's like what you're focusing on, how you write your newsletter, the tool that you're using. Like, there just needs to be all of the right pieces coming together to really make it stand out.
But yeah, in that sense, like sometimes it would be like, I think it's mostly individuals running the curation of Startup Digest, right? Sometimes it's teams, but usually you tend to highlight a lot the person behind this. Usually it's not companies. Like in our case, it would be like, it was me personally. Then now I've got a co-director, if you will. I don't know what's the exact term, but co-curator. So it's always the person, right? So you probably want to associate that person to the community, or you want the local community to associate the newsletter to that person's face, right? How important is that in terms of standing out from the competition?
Well, so I think that's really important too, just to have at least like that primary curator so that people can recognize the name and email address that you're coming from. It kind of is building your email reputation too, instead of just trying to switch things around all the time of like who we're sending from. It can be helpful if you do want to break up the workload. But a lot of times, it is that one individual running these newsletters, and really making them their face, the person to go to for that community. Or you're a leader, this is the person you can ask questions, and they can kind of give you the best information that's really localized.
How do you, what would be your advice? Because like one of the things we've seen in Barcelona, I mean, not particularly in Barcelona, I've seen it in a few different ecosystems. Like I'm active in Madrid, I'm active in Berlin, I'm active in San Francisco, London, and whatnot. But one of the things I see is that one really good thing Startup Digest provides the curator with is that people submit most of the content. Like, of course, we do one important part of saying like, hey, this is here. Like, I'm sure I spread the word and, people reaching out for my event, whatever. It's like submit it to Startup Digest. But people just go on the website, submit this. Whereas other newsletters, what I see, not particularly calling out anybody in Barcelona or just speaking in general, we see that they tend to scrape, I don't even know what the right pronunciation is, from other newsletters. They try to get the events, right? So how do you see the competition between newsletters that are overlapping in content, particularly events? Is it like space for cooperation? Is there any strategy?
So I think it's important, to really take the best information and share that. But I think, at least for us, it's been super important to involve the community. We really want everyone to have the chance to submit their events. And then you kind of look at, okay, well, this one is really quality. I do want to share it, even though it might be shared in another newsletter. I think really, as long as you're taking, the events that matter the most to people and are the most important to be sharing, I think it's okay if there is some overlap, some competition, whatever you need it to be. But I think just getting that, those hand-picked events, I think that's the most quality content.
Yeah, I think that you really got a strong point here, because I remember back in the day, or at least when we started like 10 years ago, running events, and me personally, so that all the newsletters focus on having all the content, all the startup news, all the funding news, all the events, all the job offers and whatnot. Whereas nowadays, I think the tendency, correct me if I'm wrong, I want to get your forecast for the industry here, is that I see it over time, newsletters tend to cherry pick like top 5 things you shouldn't miss out on, top 5 events, top 5 pieces of news that you gotta read on. Like, I don't know if that's something. Startup Digest has always been about us curating, so it doesn't immediately go into the newsletter. It's always like accept, reject, accept, reject, accept, reject. So we do that. But this idea of the cherry pick top 5, whatever, is that something that you have seen as a trend in the industry? Are we moving towards that, or where do you see the weekly newsletters, in particular for events? Where are they going to?
I think this move to curated content is super important. You want somebody kind of filtering that for you, so you can spend, the first 5-10 minutes of your day just scanning this newsletter, getting the most important pieces and moving on with your day. So I think that having those people that are handpicking that for you is super important. And I think that that's what's going to make, newsletters, have high engagement, have longevity, is really just focusing on that curation piece.
I don't know if you can get into technicalities, but now you're saying some specifics about the content of the emails, right? And we see that with the years, as years go by, we see that there's a change in the content of the emails, structure, the frequency, and whatnot. And so I wanted to know, like, what have you seen in the industry that is particularly useful nowadays? Like, I remember a couple of years back, every goddamn newsletter had a GIF. Right? Like GIFs and then it's like, oh, all of the sites got GIFs. Like, that's really good. I'm going to open this newsletter just for the GIFs. Whereas nowadays it looks a little bit outdated. So in a more serious tone, however, what is helping nowadays to, first off, open a newsletter? Then we're going to go into scrolling through it.
Yeah. So I mean, people want to see the best information right away. So they want that personalized, touch at the top. That's where we're jumping into the introduction, getting to know that person who is handpicking the content. You want to feel like it's your friend giving you that information, someone you can trust, who is handpicking what you're about to read. Jumping into the best, articles, resources. Here's like these upcoming deadlines, just the things that you need to know about right now in short, quick bites where it's easy to digest that information. I think being able to embed different types of media just can make things a little more interesting than just, a plain list, but we do try to keep it pretty simple.
And then how about the content itself? Because we kind of you kind of answer both, but more specifically, as we tend to have over time a shorter attention span, because that's the problem in society, right? Yes. I find myself skimming through every email. I use Superhuman for email, right? And they're not a sponsor, so no free publicity here. But we're going to be talking about this kind of email clients, because you just go from email to email, as I said previously. You archive, you delete, you just hit next and whatever. They automatically open the emails for you. Some of them, they do prefetching. Therefore, they are artificially modifying or sort of I don't even know what the right word is that, but they're kind of tweaking the engagement rates. And they are not exactly those, because sometimes, most of the time, it's not intentional to open that email. If it were not for the auto open, you wouldn't open some of these emails, but you just kind of delete, archive, whatever, save for later. And you just go through all of them. So all of a sudden, you open all of the emails. Right? So have you noticed that? Are you working towards I don't know if there's an implementation for that in Startup Digest? How are you taking this into consideration in your own metrics, for instance?
Yeah, it's something that we're definitely looking into. I think what I'm kind of jumping in and getting most interested in is seeing what people are actually clicking on based on those who have opened the newsletter. So getting deeper into those sort of click-through rates, seeing the type of content, and seeing what's performing the best, so we can kind of tailor it from there and share that information with the curators.
Because one of the things that and that's really interesting. Let's go into what do people click on? Because I think that one of the things that Startup Digest helped to shape the industry, at least in events, is that people will most likely click on the things that are on the top part of a newsletter, right? So because we list the events in order of the date, we send out our newsletter. I think it goes out on every Monday in Barcelona. So therefore, people on Monday they click on the events happening on Monday or Tuesday because they are in the top part of the email. Therefore, these events have seen a significant increase of people going to those events because I'm just going to sign up to the first 2 events of the week, right? And they just kind of like don't scroll down to Thursday and Wednesday, which used to be like the cool kids, the cool days to organize an event on. And now I find myself like sometimes we do start grinding in on Mondays or Tuesdays, and we've got way more people than when we used to do them on Thursday. And I see an increase in people coming from Startup Digest, for instance, or from other newsletters. Start of the week, people are going to click on those, and then they probably don't go towards the end of the list. I don't know. What other things have you found interesting or worth sharing in terms of click-through rates and where people click inside the newsletters?
I think that it is important, whatever you put at the top of the newsletter, like you said, is going to get the most eyes. People don't want to have to like scroll down and then have, if your email gets clipped, if it's too long, then they're having to click through again to see the rest of the email. So I think that that's where that handpicking of your content comes through. Like you really want just those small pieces that are most important to actually get those eyes on there. So I think just keeping it short is going to be really important.
Have you seen anybody being extremely creative in order to stand out in the events, kind of like some sort of formatting, or because I know wherever there's a system in place, you can always cheat it, right? And so if there's like, I don't know, I've seen people trying to disguise their seminars or events in other cities. They want to get like some cross promotion. I see like people organizing an event in freaking Madrid, for instance, and we're in Barcelona, we're not going to share that, right? Doesn't really make sense. So, and some people disguising that as an event in Barcelona, but when you click on I don't know, there's people trying to cheat the system. Have you seen anything like funny or that's, was striking as surprising, or some growth marketers trying to cheat the system?
I wouldn't say like trying to cheat the system necessarily, but our digest in Portugal.
It's my words, no worries.
Our digest in Portugal does such a great job of putting so much information into such a small space. They really take advantage of using the text fields and kind of putting in all of these different bullets of this is everything you need to read for these different types of sections. Because a lot of times you get kind of too bogged down with a lot of images, a lot of text, when it's really just showing you this one single event and it's taking up a lot of space. So I think utilizing everything you can above the fold of that email is going to be, just the best bet to really get people to click through and see the best.
So kind of they're writing sort of like a summary, a too long didn't read part, so that people are like, okay, this is interesting, I'm going to read the rest of it, right? Because I don't know the standards of the industry. We discussed, but I think that was in an event in Startup 3 years ago with people at SendGrid, and they said literally if it's below the fold, no one's going to read it. Like above the fold or the first quarter or third of a newsletter, you're going to get 95% of the clicks. The rest just literally doesn't care. If you're not going to make it to the top, just don't even think about submitting it. And so, or including a link. So I think that goes really on point, really aligned with what you've seen. What are the bad practices that you've seen over the year? Because one of the things we see, particularly at Startup Brand, for instance, people try to get this so that they can get recognition or a tool that, it's backed, sponsored by Techstars or Google for Entrepreneurs or whatever, to kind of get a little bit of privilege and authority into the system, but they are not really willing to commit to the hard work. So are you also suffering from that? And what can we do to kind of avoid people to, from getting the Startup Digest issue in a local, in a city, and then using it to their own advantage, not to service the community? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think that that's really important for our model of, having these volunteers around the world that are curating this content. And you want to make sure that you're finding people that are doing it for the right intentions. They want to give back to their community. They're not just trying to focus on self-promotion. So I think that that's, important to us during that interview process before we bring on a curator. It's pretty easy to see if someone's doing it for the right reasons or not, and sort of what their background is. So I think that is important. And if it is an event that you're involved in that you want to promote it, I think just having kind of that disclosure where you let people know this is something that you're involved with yourself and you're helping promote it. I think personally, at least for Startup Digest, I think being able to share content from all different types of, companies, organizations, whether or not it happens to be a competitor of our own, like, I think you really want that best information to filter up to the top, and what you are putting on yourself should compare and should be strong enough to live on its own and be shared with everything else and really stand out. So I think that's kind of what it comes down to is, making sure that really the person who's putting it together wants to build up their community. They're not just trying to promote just one thing, but really get a voice of everybody. And just, if it's the best content, then that's what you're going to share.
Because there's a reputational nuance here, right? And I think there's an aspect here. If you let the wrong person run this locally, then the reputation of Startup Digest is smeared by this person because of wrongdoings, right? And you don't want to have that, or you don't want to have people blocking or preventing other people who do it better from having this their local issue or chapter, right? So let's say if I'm not doing a great job in Barcelona, I'm doing like a mediocre job. The opportunity cost is there, right? Somebody else could do a better job. So how can you actually police this? How can you actually? I don't know if. You mentioned like really specific case of, somebody's doing a really bad job, but like in the case of mediocre jobs, people who are like so, they're kind of like, she doesn't send it very, very often, but whenever she does, it's like kind of like good content, but there could be somebody else better, right? What to do in these cases? It's not easy.
I think it is difficult. It can be a tricky situation, but we do see applications that will come through for Digest that are active and they want to help. They want to participate, bring in another voice. So I think that encouraging teams in those situations, adding co-curators, bringing in other perspectives can help, to just have more than one person kind of running the show. If we're getting like too deep into self-promotion or, whatever the conflict might be, I think really just keeping an eye on those newsletters. For our model, we do have someone who's looking at all of the newsletters before they're sent out, just kind of keep an eye on things and help watch for quality, things like that. So I think just having a second set of eyes can be helpful.
Yeah, I remember a couple of times in the, these 6 years that we've been running Startup Digest, you've sent, or somebody in your team sent our way, somebody else wanted to collaborate on the issue. And as soon as we reach out to these people, they never got back to us. And they're like, kind of, so on the one hand, it's kind of like a wake-up call for you to say like, hey, there's somebody else who might want to do this, so maybe they can collaborate, or maybe they can do even a better job. So you can kind of like reassess yourself whether you want to continue with it or not. Because sometimes, not in this case, but other projects, we thought that maybe we're passing the torch on somebody else. And but on the other hand, like these people not getting back to us maybe makes us think that they really wanted to do it only for themselves. They didn't really want to collaborate. They wanted to be the single person. Because we've gotten the same with Startup Grind. Sometimes they send people like, they want to collaborate on the Startup Grind local chapter. We reach out like, hey, we're looking for new volunteers. Come join anytime. They're like, no, really, I wanted the chapter, I want the whole thing. Then maybe you're not really the right person, right? Because maybe you will never earn it this way. So I'm pretty sure that you have seen this in many chapters, but like in your case, at least in Startup Digest, let's say it's less physical. So you have less interaction. I know there's like some Techstars. There used to be a Techstars get together, right? Back in the day. I don't remember the name. It was Summit or something like that, right? How do you strengthen the collaboration and the bonds between all the curators of Startup Digest worldwide?
It's been hard since we haven't been able to have those annual conferences where we're all getting together. Yeah. But I think taking advantage of like different social media groups to really connect people, I think that's one of the values of being a curator is being able to kind of plug in with all these other curators around the world. And since a lot of curators are founders, they might have questions or, wanting advice from other people. And it's just kind of a way to plug in. And I think that international perspective is really interesting too. And you could, at this point, like if you could go anywhere in the world almost and be like, oh, I want to meet up with that Startup Digest curator, and we can kind of connect you to someone. So it's really interesting to see that global reach.
Yeah, one of the things I always stress in our events and communications, like even when I give talks in conferences and podcasts and whatnot, is like wherever you go as an entrepreneur, if you're going to spend 1 week in Turkey, we're going to spend 1 week in Iceland or in whatever, just reach out to the person running Startup Digest, Startup Grind, or FuckUp Nights or whatever, because they know the ecosystem inside out. They can just introduce you to literally anybody and everybody in the industry, right? So it's probably helpful. One coffee with that person will give you more insights than with, meeting 3 or 4 random founders, right? Because that person has been like grinding it out for years and literally has interviewed people, has collected info from these people and whatnot. I want to talk specifically a little bit about the product and technology, because we used to have a bespoke platform, and I don't know how deep we can go into that. But I really want to, because we recently, like in the last 2 years, we moved to Revue, right? So a comparison between having a bespoke platform through which we used to collect all the information from the events submitted by the industry and our people in the community, and then send out the newsletters. But to be honest, it was really simple. It was kind of like an MVP, and it grew updated throughout the years. That's why we moved to Revue, right? What were your views on that, and how's it changed being to using somebody else's software, if you will?
Yeah, so in the very early days, it was a very, very manual process to put together the digest. The curator would send us an email with the content they wanted to include, and then we would have to kind of copy and paste that into MailChimp and, format everything, get it all ready, and do that for every single newsletter that we were sending out. So that was just not a process that was going to scale long term.
Not scalable, really.
So it was kind of wonderful, though, like seeing one of these curators step up, and he built us a little tool that would kind of take that email and put it into a feed that would auto format it for me. So that definitely started to save time. And then that was kind of the start of like, okay, well, I think at this point we're going to start to need a custom built platform that could really handle what we were doing with events, because that didn't really exist at the time, of a tool that could format, nicely into sharing different events and having it pull to your personal calendar, things like that. So we had the budget at the time to create a custom built platform. So that worked really well for a few years. And then it was like, well, now the technology is kind of outdated. We really need to step up, because now there's so many newsletters flooding the market. We need to be able to keep up. And so from there, we started testing a few different platforms, but Revue is the one that stood out for us. So we moved our reading lists over to Revue, and that gave us a lot more flexibility with our template and being able to share different types of media. And then from there, once that really did well, we made the move to kind of shut down the old platform. It was having all these bugs, technical things we couldn't keep up with at that point, and move all of our digests over to Revue. And they were recently acquired by Twitter, so there's a lot of different integrations there that I think have been really helpful for the curators, so they can kind of plug into the Twitter audience and share different tweets, have those embedded into the newsletter. A lot of tools that they just kind of did it better than we were able to do with our kind of outdated platform. So I think it was a really good move for us.
Yeah, on the one hand, we were running on a bespoke software platform that it grew outdated, but it was covering 100% of the needs that we had, because it was built bespokely, right? So therefore, of course, it had some bugs, and some of them were really annoying. Gotta tell you, sometimes oh my god, oh no, this happened again. It didn't have auto save, and sometimes it would crash at all of your work of an afternoon. It was gone, right? However, it got follow the principles of MVPs and software nowadays. We you build stuff as you need it, and then when it becomes painful, you take the next step, right? So you validated your business model, or your idea, your hypothesis with that super early, super primitive platform. Then you move to this one, and then eventually made it to Revue I thought it was called Revue, not Revue, but now I think it's it makes sense. But
I hear it pronounced differently from a bunch of people. So
tomato, right? It doesn't really matter. But like running on top of something else, there's always the distinction of now the platform doesn't really solve 100% of our problems because it's not 100% adapted to us. So how are you dealing with that internally as like somebody? I assume that you have a big say in the product itself, right? So how are you dealing with these? Are you able to customize it from within or not really? How flexible is that?
It's worked out pretty well for us. Of course, like the hardest part is that we're missing that calendar piece because Revue was not built, just for events. They do a lot of things really well and things that we just like couldn't do or couldn't offer with the old platform. So I think there's a lot more like positive things that came out of it. But of course, like that event piece is a little bit difficult because like you said, we had it so customized before that it met all of our needs. So I think I've been able to find quite a few workarounds with the Revue platform to make it work for us. But yes, that event piece of being like, oh, I want to, take this feed of events and have it into Revue. So it's really easy for the curators, to plug that information in. Recurring events, things like that get a little bit tricky. So I try to find the most workarounds that I can just to I guess meet everybody's needs, but of course, like it is difficult.
What are like a couple of growth tips that you would recommend for people running a newsletter, and particularly Startup Digest? What have you seen? Because I think that one thing I'm missing would be great, maybe to know more about other digest curators around the globe to see or to learn from them and see how are they doing this, what kind of content they share, what do they do with the content, how they repurpose it, how do they integrate it with something else. Let's say we run, for instance, in Barcelona, we run a Slack community for entrepreneurs and people in Barcelona. Basically, it's like 2,000 people, something like that. And I haven't found a way to connect that with our Slack. Whereas, I did it when there was a calendar, right? With the calendar, it worked. But now that we don't have the calendar, it's kind of like, it's tricky. There are no events this week, right? So we kind of like have to do it manually, and it's not especially great. But like, what are some things that we could do to improve our local issue of Startup Digest?
So I think it's important, I guess, to kind of feature like, I guess, recurring events. And so what we can do in Revue is like duplicate the issue and really pull in those things so that it can run for multiple weeks. And so people that may have missed one issue can still catch that information. I think really making it localized to your community. What I found is it's really different. Like I can send you different examples of what's working for other people, but it could be different what you need to do. So I think really digging into the data to seeing what people are clicking on the most, like what type of events, and really digging into sharing more of what your audience is looking for. Like some people will have a more technical audience than others. Some people want to focus more on networking events. I think what's really nice about the Revue platform compared to the old platform is that there's a lot more flexibility in the actual template. So you can create different sections and bring in more than just events. You can, here's what I've read this week that I think is interesting. Here's some application deadlines to look out for. Here's a video of the week, podcast of the week, startup of the week, like whatever you want to do to really like customize that information. But I think being more data driven is going to really help you tailor what works for your community, which could be very different from someone else.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that we're moving towards, like, it used to be like super niche, super specialized events only. And I think that the value of Startup Digest has outgrown its initial concept, right? So, and now we're able as community curators or content curators to cherry pick the best podcast of the week or the best event of the week or this news, like this startup got acquired, this happened here and whatnot. So I want to get like, to kind of like to wrap it up, we got only 2 minutes for a couple of quick questions. The first one is, where do you see the future of newsletters? Because for as long as I've been in the game, people are saying newsletters are dead. They're going to be dead next year. And it's not happening. Like, what's the future of newsletters and what's the future of Digest in particular?
So I think for the future of newsletters, really just like I've been trying to mention, like bringing your personality to it. Really, like there needs to be something that sets you apart, whatever it is that you're offering. Make it stand out, let yourself shine. It's okay to, represent your community, but be willing to listen to those in the community, and they're going to give you content that could be really interesting. So I think, taking community suggestions from your audience, engaging with people. If they email you, write them back. Like simple things of just, bringing more than just, this newsletter that hits their inbox. It's more creating your own community within your startup community. I think that's really important in terms of Digest. We're looking at ways to kind of integrate it more with Techstars and with that Techstars brand. There's a lot of places where they might have a Techstars presence, but we don't necessarily have a Digest there. So that's something that I'm looking at from my end, is really being able to kind of plug in and bring it more into that Techstars sphere.
Can we see any kind of collaboration, like higher level collaboration between Startup Grind and Digest? Happy to help there, but I think that's something really necessary, and I think would profit both sides immensely, if you ask me.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely have. I've seen an increase in the applications that come through where it is people that are connected to their local Startup Grind chapter. So we are seeing some overlap, starting with being a curator and leading the chapters.
I've been advocating for years. Whenever we go to, there's a global conference for Startup Grind every year in Redwood City. And I always kind of give a talk about leading community, because we do many things here in Barcelona. So one of the things you absolutely ought to do is get the Startup Digest newsletter, because it coordinates so well with Startup Grind. I don't understand how are we not collaborating more. I guess the agenda of Startup Grind on the one hand and Techstars on the other are completely different. But I think that more often than not, we're overlapping a lot, especially in the latest years in which we've seen, more people taking over the duty of Startup Digest Curator, because they've heard of my talk at Startup Grind or other people being, advocates for that. And last but not least, this is a signature question of the podcast. Everybody gets this, and we're trying to democratize failure, and more particularly fuck-ups. We want to hear one of yours. What's the worst fuck-up related to newsletters that you've ever committed? You got to own up to it. It's going to be yours. You're going to talk about somebody else. That's very easy to do.
I feel like, at least for me, this might not be a giant one, but it is difficult when there's been times where maybe you've accidentally deleted something that someone has worked on. And for us, we're relying on that curator to give their personal time and put together the newsletter. And I've accidentally deleted their work. I'm oh no. So that would probably be pretty bad, having to get those people to start over.
The reason I'm asking, we always ask this in every episode, but the very last episode, one of our guests had a terrible one related to email, in which he CC'd the wrong person, totally the wrong person. It was supposedly a response only to me, talking shit about certain, or saying oh, that person is not important at all, don't listen to her. Or and he hit reply all, and I was boom, with a local politician actually. So I was wow, that was a big deal. But yeah, deleting all people's work, that's a pretty harsh one. Jessica, 1 minute for you. I'm rolling the carpet there. You got this camera. 1 minute for you. How can we help you? How can we help Startup Digest from this podcast?
I think kind of checking out our list of cities that we have a digest available. If you don't see yours, jumping in to apply. If you feel sort of a calling to be a curator, it's definitely a great way to plug into your community. So, even if you see a digest already for your community, like we said, you can be a co-curator. If you don't see your city on the list, apply. We'd love to be able to add more cities, add more different topics of reading lists. I think there's a lot more we can jump into with crypto and all of that. So we're definitely looking for new ideas and new topics to jump into.
Are we gonna drop the hot shit new words, buzzwords like metaverse, NFT, and whatnot?
Yes.
Are we gonna do that?
Yeah.
No, what you said is absolutely spot on. As I said, some people, they might see the list of cities, they'll say oh, there's already one chapter, one digest in Oakland. Yeah, but maybe it is not active. So definitely reach out to Jessica, reach out to me, and I'll make the introduction. Thank you very much, Jessica. Have a nice day.
Yes, thank you.